coming out the jacket, cause we turning up the heat. I wanna see you clapping when you get up out your seat. It's time to make it happen when we hit these streets. I'm coming in hot and I can't be beat. Watch out now. Everybody watch out. Watch out.
Welcome everybody to episode 55 of Agencyphonics. I'm here today with David Berkowitz, and so I can't even say the W properly myself.
Don't try too hard. It's fine.
But for those of you who are regular listeners to the show, you'll know how appalling I am at pronouncing names full stop. Before I get to David, I just want to say a couple of quick thank yous. Thank you to Forecast, the project management software, for supporting our shows and our community. Without you, we can't do all of these wonderful things. Check out their details. They're in the show notes as always. And as always, a quick thank you to Caitlin and Abby behind the scenes making these podcast shows happen and everyone turn up on time. Pete's not with us today. He's not feeling too well today. He's a bit under the weather, not COVID, I'm pleased to say. So it is just me. And so without further ado, let's crack on, David. So you and I got introduced via Peter Davidson, who has been a big supporter and a fan of the stuff we've been doing in the UK from Canada. And he introduced me because you guys had sort of started to tokenize or put a cryptocurrency into a community. And we'll get to that in a minute. And then we had a chat and I understood that your background was, you actually had quite a sort of a serious background really in agencies. Then you became a CMO. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about your background and what you do today?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, it's been this series of hybrid roles because I got into the digital media industry to get paid to write and not be a journalist because I had too much respect for journalism, and that respect has only increased. So I'm actually glad I didn't have the nerve to join the ranks because I don't think I could deal with that kind of pressure, especially these days. Instead, I ultimately went that marketing route and have worked on a mix of the agency side and some really exciting marketing tech companies. I've been in these strategy and marketing roles, veering into biz dev, and so it hasn't been this linear path for some of that time. I've been working on my own. Most of the time working with a mix of agency and tech companies. On the agency side, working with a ton of B2C brands, but most of my day-to-day work has been B2B marketing for the agencies or tech companies themselves. So I've gotten to see a lot of different aspects of the industry.
Amazing. And I think you've obviously worked within some quite large agencies, and then you've had that role as CMO. Like, what are the kind of, from your perspective, what are the lessons, I guess, have you learned? Like, if you had to go back into an agency today, now you've been on the other side, are there things that you would now take back that maybe you didn't know before?
Oh yeah, tons. And so I won't forget when I first heard from the folks at MRY, this shop I was talked to in 2013, and they I talked about potentially joining them, and they said they wanted me to come on board as their first CMO. And I called a good friend of mine, Garth Holsinger, and I said, "What do you think of this?" And he goes, "Agency CMO, that's weird." And as soon as Garth said that, I knew I was going to accept the offer. So yeah, bridging that gap has been weird because agencies are also terrible at marketing themselves historically, and they underinvest in anything that just feels like the cost center as opposed to like pure agencies. Despite what they do for their clients, they'll see marketing for themselves as just pure expense and not a revenue driver. So it's an amazing uphill battle there. And agencies are also notoriously undifferentiated. I'd say the biggest thing that I've learned over the years, where if I could go back to MRY, for instance, and do things over again, number one, flat out, would be spend as much time as possible with the head of sales. Ironically, the head of sales at MRY then, Evan Kraut, who remains a good friend of mine, literally sat across from me. Our partners were good friends, like we'd interacted with each other before I even started there, and yet we barely scratched the surface in really collaborating and really aligning each other's goals together. And so I think that there was a lot of stuff that was being done way too separately. And we should have been having these daily or at least weekly debriefs on like, okay, so here's what I'm putting out there. Is this going to help you and your team do your job better? Right? Like, am I clear cut? And it's also possible that I could say to him, by the way, I'm going to do this crazy thing right now. This has nothing to do with sales. This actually has to do with talent retention. I want to make this place a better place for people to come and work. I want to make it easier for people to tell their friends that they should work here, right? And so it's not that sales has to be the be all end all. I just wanted to make sure that for everything I was doing, I had a clear reason for doing it. And if it was sales driven and if there was new business associated with it, how can we measure this better? How can we just make sure we're reaching the right kinds of people? And while I tended to think of my CEO as my main client within the firm, I wish I switched that up and had the head of sales as my key client.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's good to hear that, because I think accidentally when I grew my agency through the noughties, I had someone apply for an account manager's job, and I too didn't have a marketing manager or director at that stage, and so, but I was so kind of like motivated to make sure that people did their dream jobs in life, and this account manager had got a degree in marketing. No one had ever given them an opportunity because she didn't have the experience. And so when I asked her to, as part of the interview process, go away and do a marketing plan for our agency, and she came back and she did it, and I loved it, and I ended up taking a risk because I didn't think, like most agencies, I didn't need a marketing manager, right? That's what I felt. Right. So I took her on, and you know what? When I actually finish my journey building, selling, exiting, I looked back at the journey and I realized that was there was 2 or 3 pivotal moments, and recruiting her was one of them. And so when I went into doing consultancy now, David, going into agencies, helping them scale up, I often joke and say I'm a real fraud, because all I do is I turn up, I put a marketing manager in, then the billings go up, and it's like, oh, you're a hero, Spencer. But it's actually a bit more than that, because I have to give them the confidence to invest in the role and to set a budget and make them understand how to be. Because as you rightly say, I think you have to be a good B2B marketing manager to be a marketing manager in an agency. And a lot of agencies recruit like digital marketing people who are just not really understanding the whole holistic perspective of it. But what I love about what you just said was about working with the sales side, because I tend to align often the marketing manager with the CEO, because obviously they are the practitioner, they're the expert, the evangelist, maybe the personal brand. And if I can augment that voice, it can be with the marketing manager, it can be really powerful. However, a lot of people don't then bring the salesperson in to look at where the leads are actually coming from and how can you help them. And I don't know whether you agree with this, but I've been really anti the sales and marketing role combined, because I always worry when it's combined, there's always a conflict. But if you've got 2 people coming together with specialisms, it becomes more powerful. Have you found that as well or not?
Yeah, I think that this is where I mean, sales and marketing, it's usually they're just some distinct skill sets, and there are things where I also want to make it clear, even when I can contribute to the sales side, and I'll wind up doing some business development directly for some firms I work with, but that I really want to do so in making some of the right introductions, building some of those relationships, and not getting in the way of the salesperson being able to work and close a deal, because I know this is like I get, like, I respect people who have the right training and experience and know how to navigate that in ways that, like, yes, technically I could do some of that, and technically
Yeah.
there are plenty of salespeople who can go and figure out something resembling the right marketing mix. But usually, like, there are very few salespeople I know, and really, like any of the best ones that I've worked with, they want to do as little marketing as possible. They want to sell, you know, they want to, or they want to mentor their sales teams. They want to, they want to dive deep into the data that the marketing team helps, you know, generate for them. But they like they don't want to, you know, pick one event versus another. They don't want to, you know, figure out like what you should be saying on Twitter versus LinkedIn. Like they don't want to do any of the day to day, let alone come up with what the, you know, like they'll have a lot of feedback on, you know, when you come up with the elevator pitch from the marketing front. But they don't want to have to go through that whole process. No. They just want to take that pitch and sell the hell out of it. You know?
Yeah, I normally find that if I have come across the hybrid role of where people do both, what will happen is that they'll say this, they'll go, oh, yeah, I haven't done any marketing because I've been busy selling, or I've been so busy marketing I haven't been able to sell. And there's always an excuse why the results aren't there, and it's because it's very hard, I think, to be brilliant at two things. You know, sometimes you've got to focus on one thing. Also, I think marketing, you have to be quite organized, and there's often quite a lot of organization. A lot of salespeople aren't the most organized in the world.
And also, when you're talking about CEOs, you know, one of the things I've also come to appreciate is to your point, the CEO is usually often I'd say the best marketer at the organization. You know, they know the brand story. They've got the vision. They've got the talking points down pat because they created them, and whether or not they're well organized or on paper somewhere. And they've almost definitely got the passion to deliver it, even if they don't have the polish. Like you just feel that from a CEO or founder. But what they typically don't have is the time to focus on it. So if I'm coming into a marketing role and working with someone like that, it's like, okay, well, I might actually not be able to do everything as well as the CEO could, but by dedicating nearly 100% of my time to it versus the 5 or 10% of time they do, I can still do it way better than they can and harness them more effectively.
Yeah. So putting back on your sort of non-agency CMO hat now, if you were to appoint or engage an agency now, having been on the other side, what are the things that, you know, would help? Would you look for? Would help you buy into an agency?
Well, I'd say some of recruiting an agency is not unlike recruiting a strong job candidate. So just trying to see what can they articulate the most relevant work they've done, and that doesn't even necessarily mean coming from the same vertical. If what I'm doing is it's very app install driven, then I could I could have some running shoe app, and they might have done this for pet food or something. But if they've been able to hit on the same goal, then that to me, and it's very clear that they know the kind of goals that I'm shooting for, and they've done work that achieves it, then it doesn't necessarily have to be this, like, I'd almost be wary if there's too much potential to have that cookie cutter work, right? And I think that there are some really big X factors out there in terms of are they just trying to pitch as much business as possible, or is there some reason they want to work on this business? Does this account matter to them? And I think some of the conversations around, like, if you're getting the A team or the C team, things like I think some of that is a little overrated, just in the sense for like on the marketing side, you often do get what you pay for there, but you could still wind up working with a much a scrappy or even a slightly untested team that really wants to work on that account and just has some ideas they're even starting to bring to you, even if they're not yet the right ideas, that could be that you know that this is someone you really want to give a shot to. And I'd say the biggest almost like a red flag is if they're just trying to say, well, if they're trying to be a little too formulaic with their approach instead, and they just think that because if it's the pet food brand and they've worked on 3 other pet food, then they just think that this is a lot, right? They're God's gift to pet food marketers, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll still have that motivation to keep coming up with the right ideas for you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that when I had my agency, I always remember I used to have a slide in my deck, which was why I want to work with you, and I used to always try and find, like I always wanted people to feel like I wanted to work for them, that they wouldn't just be another client, that actually they were helping us in a way as much as we were helping them. And I think it's interesting that you look for that. I think when I go into the because I'm non-exec for a lot of agencies now, when I speak to the agencies about when they win deals, pitches, and I'm like, what was the feedback? Often it comes back. We could tell that you simply wanted to work with us more than everybody else. So that kind of tells you what you're saying is right. That actually a lot of agencies maybe just go through a routine of turning up, answering a brief, but actually fail to kind of really connect with the people they're going to work with and demonstrate and show, like, why are you going to be an important client for us? How are you going to, not only how are we going to help you, but how will you help us as a business? And therefore it becomes, there's more intrinsic motivation, let's say, to do a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Sound about right?
Yeah.
Cool. Love that. So to talk to me, David, I want to know, like, community-based marketing for me. I mean, I think I think I stumbled into it a little bit by accident, if I'm honest. Myself, I sort of ended up with a network of agency friends who used to run agencies, and I realized that there was some value that they needed, maybe some knowledge and some learning. And so we used to run a series of events. And then it kind of, like, in a very weird way, we needed to find somehow to bring them all together. And there wasn't really a lot of B2B communities. There's a lot of B2C communities and sports communities, and maybe 10 years ago. And so from my own personal experience, we sort of stumbled into building a community of agencies. And I was quite interested to sort of understand from your perspective, how did it start with you? Because you have well, explain a little bit about your community now, who's in it and how large it is, because it's pretty impressive.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and I think it's this great point of commonality to hear, what you're working on, and it's inspiring to hear about the work you're doing in that space. I started Serial Marketers about 3.5 years ago now, and it was one of those things that when I launched my consulting practice under the Serial Marketer name. As soon as I did that, I was thinking, like a lot of people might identify as serial marketers. Is there something that I should do about that? But I was also wary of launching a community, especially because they can very quickly become vanity projects. And so I was trying to avoid anything like that. And I was sitting on this idea literally for a couple of years. And then I wrapped up this one engagement I had. I had a little, suddenly it was a little more open-ended for a bit in terms of how I'd spend my time. Like, maybe now I can give this a shot. And I put some idea out there in 2018 with a single LinkedIn post and a Google form, and said, got some idea for how we could do this. Especially at the time, Slack was just starting to migrate from like a pure, very tech use case to something a little more broad on the corporate side. And the one thing I still like the best about Slack, even if I have mixed feelings about it as a community tool, is the way it organizes conversations. And so so even right now, ahead of the Consumer Electronics Show coming up, I just created a CES channel, and so folks who only want to talk about that, great. We don't have to then go and bother everyone else out there who's just, you know, the 95% who just aren't going to the show and don't care. So all of this I really like about it, and then it's just one of those things that's grown most heavily by word of mouth over the years. We're now ballpark around 3,000 members. And just terrific, typically mid to senior level marketing professionals, though there's some more up and coming talent that when they request to join, I love it. When there are people coming from different markets, that's terrific. So there's a global base to the community, even if we're very, very US heavy in a lot of the cities that you'd expect. And a lot of the main use cases that come up are like a lot of the ask and answer for when someone has a request, whether they're looking for a job or they're hiring. There was some that just came up today or yesterday. Someone looking for a good accountant who can help freelancers, or maybe they need a good recommendations for like people who've used customer data platforms and they're trying to understand that. So when these things arise, like that's typically what will motivate someone to join. And then quite a few, what I love to see is that they're members who are regularly doing business with each other and finding jobs and gigs and just learning about something they wouldn't have known about before. And it's just been this fantastic group to be a part of, let alone shepherd.
Yeah, it's funny because whenever I meet marketing CMOs or senior sort of marketeers, I always ask them the question, you know, how do you find your agencies? And it's amazing how many of them refer, and you may have experience as well, where you ask your peers, you know, who have you worked with? Who have you trusted? Has anyone worked in that space? So I guess in a way, it must be quite a nice community for that kind of support as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so how long did it take you with the community before you started to get sort of critical mass of engagement? Did it just happen from day one, or did it take a certain size to get going?
No, I mean, I think it was just a lot of those steps along the way. Like for the first year and a half, I'd be like, wait, is this dead yet? No. Okay, that's good. Is it dead yet? No. Can I take a few days or a week off and it's still here when I get back? And there's still people. Okay, that's a good sign. And so there were a few of those milestones, and I feel like, coincidentally, also we got to the 1,000 member mark in April 2020. Okay. So it was a slow build to get to that point, but we reached that milestone again at this very disruptive time for all of us, and I do remember March 15th, 2020, where just as even the idea of like, what the hell does a lockdown mean? What does a quarantine mean? And I've been based here in the middle of New York City. I'm literally around the corner from the Empire State Building, so right in the middle of Manhattan. And I remember thinking that day, said, all of a sudden my own community went from a nice to have to a need to have for me. Mm-hmm. And so it did. I will say, that one of the bright spots of all of this is that I think that people value community in ways that maybe I personally would have taken for granted in some other ways before, and so there's a little more intention when I'm even picking which communities to engage with, let alone my own.
Yeah, because I'd imagine that CMOs or senior, C-level marketeers are quite busy people, right? To be checking into a community and updating. Is that right, or do you find that it just varies? Some people are probably a quiet time in their career and they're in it a lot, or do you think people make the time for it?
I don't think most people make enough time for it. I think so often when I've seen a brand like senior brand side marketers join, almost without fail, it turns out they're job hunting right now, and someone tells them, "Oh, this is a community where you might see some jobs. Like you should be networking more." But until that happens, then they're not focused on that, and clearly people have these demanding jobs. So yeah, and I'd say that a lot of the most active people in the community, especially at first, have been these fellow connectors who are then able to recommend resources from outside the community and just connect people in a lot of interesting ways. And so they were mainly the catalyst that that provided something of value for other people there. I think that I mean, there's so much, whether it's a community or just professional events and things like that, that these things get deprioritized very, very quickly, and so it's very hard to just make that even like 5 or 10 minutes a day as part of your job.
Yeah. So David, I wanted to share with you an example of one of my agencies, and they're a small upcoming agency. They focus in the third sector. So a lot of their clients are causes, charities, not-for-profits. And they recently set up their own community for people in the charity sector. Mm-hmm. So they started to invite, some of them were marketeers, but a lot of them were people running charities as well. And they started to build this community up. And I guess the question I had to you, because you've been a CMO in an agency, and you've also had the experience of setting up a community, do you feel that agencies should try and create, in their own way, some form of community for their clients and for their prospects, whoever they may well be? Because they're always marketeers. I guess sometimes they're CIOs or CTOs in different types of agencies. Do you think it's a good thing to do?
Well, I think that there are lots of different ways to do it, but ultimately, I mean, if I think back to how 360i like to operate, then for 360i, they had these annual summits that became just a very anticipated event for a ton of their clients, and like the bigger they got and the more prestigious their clients got, then this is something that like for their clients, it was like the best networking event of the year. So now if they were to try to do an online version of that, I'm not sure they'd have the same success. For including community as one of the focus areas that they have, where how can they help their clients bring a lot of their customers together? How can they then there are lots of great reasons to do so, and I think a lot of it's working backwards and saying, well, what can community solve for? Because new business, for instance, could be part of it, but there are some communities that are driven far more around, say, product feedback, around customer support, around peer support. So now you have your customers and consumers even almost like helping you create some of that documentation for each other in these like resource libraries. And so there are lots of different reasons to do that. One of the biggest challenges that goes into it, though, is treating it as a very long-term play, and that this is something that even in that example of the 360i version of community, which is not even necessarily what they would have called it at the time, but this is something that took years to build. And so to keep focusing on that over time, where you like your monthly or quarterly engagement numbers at first might be really low, and it might take a little while. You might think that you're starting something that's very customer service driven, and it winds up actually being a case where you can start testing new ideas for people who are going to start paying attention, and now so now you're able to then bring in a lot of your product and R&D team in ways that perhaps they weren't part of those initial conversations. So these things can have that evolution, but I'd say going in with some of that sense of purpose first, and seeing, are there some interesting ways where community can solve for it? There quite possibly are.
Yeah, I think those benefits are really, really important. And it's funny, as you were speaking, then I was just thinking about, when I go to South by Southwest, in Austin, Texas, that they have the community where I can find the other attendees. I know who in the UK is going over there. I can try and find people by sector or geography, and that kind of the event support is a great thing. That you're right, the shared learning, product testing is brilliant. I think getting feedback on services and products. But I love what you said about the more of a long game. I think too many people always looking for quick wins these days, aren't they, with everything or silver bullets. But the reality is that I think if you're going to go down this path, I think you're right. You have to accept that this is going to be a not a short-term thing. It's going to take time to learn and to reiterate and to develop what works for the community. And I think that's there's probably a good lesson for anyone listening, is don't go into this lightly. It's you've got to have probably a 3 to 5 year minimum expectation around how long it will take you, and it will probably start off we were quite lucky, David, because actually we started in last April with Agencynomics. So we probably got the benefit of the pandemic and everyone working remotely, as you said. And so, we grew to, it was like 1,000 members, I think, in the first 6 or 7 months. We're at about 1,500 now. It's actually growing quite nicely now. But it definitely, I saw tipping points, a certain volume of people, there's certain tipping points. And I think, but I also feel that you're right. People should also maybe look at it to build long-term friends and connections, not necessarily just dip in and dip out when you need it, because actually probably when you most need it, you won't really, you got to start all over again, right? With getting involved. So that's good. I like that. It's funny, as you were speaking as well, I was sort of thinking about some of the other experiences I've seen around even just simple community from a WhatsApp perspective, a group of clients going to an event, forming a WhatsApp group. In a way, it creates a very micro sense of community, right? It's like a little mini community there. And there's a product in the UK called Guild now, which is a bit like WhatsApp. I don't know if you've seen it in the States, where they're also building communities on a similar model. And I've seen Slack. Obviously, we're using the Mighty Networks platform for our community. But I think, I think it's good for everyone to go away and think about what the benefits are if they are to bring in a community into the business. But it can build long-term engagement, right? And long-term I think that's the key thing. It's about, being able to create long-term relationships with people if you can get them engaged.
Yeah.
So tell me about the cryptocurrency creator coin journey you went on. So give us a little bit of background on what happened and what you now do with your creator coin.
Yeah, well, this has definitely been a wild ride this year, where early in the year, a good friend of mine, Jeremiah Ouyang, a very accomplished tech analyst, so always several steps ahead of things, and he reached out to me and he said, how would you like to have a David coin? Oh, well, flattered by the idea, as ICOs, these initial coin offerings started to come up years ago. It was like, how feasible is it to do this? And it seemed actually very complicated, at least for someone like me. And so I kind of gave up on the idea, but Jeremiah said he was working with this platform, Rally.io, a new platform with some great funding and amazing talent behind it. And so this was a creator coin platform. And so he's like, he's like, I'm trying to get some interesting business, publishers, community organizers, folks like that involved. And so very quickly I was like, okay, I love the idea. I don't want to make this the David coin, because for me, I think that people will care more about the serial marketers community and connecting as marketers than they will connecting around me. I mean, maybe that's a little bit of humility, but I think it's far more accurate. And so I wanted to make this something that could be as big as possible in that regard, something where it's like if someone like yourself wants to engage with your own members through these CMO coins that ultimately arose, then you'd be perfectly fine doing so, and it would be kind of a natural extension. And actually, I had a hard time figuring out what to even call this coin. So I went to my community and I said, before I even explained what this was about, I said, if this community could have a 3 to 5 letter ticker symbol, what would it be? And there were some great ideas that came in. It was actually one of the most popular posts in the community. And there were some that were sort of like along the lines of what I was thinking, like S mark for serial marketers and things like that, and playing on the name. And then finally someone said things like KPI, key performance indicator, CTR for click-through rate. And right away I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I Google marketing acronyms and CMO comes up. And it's funny the number of times that we've said CMO during this call. It wasn't top of mind. And I said, Jeremiah, I want the CMO coin. It's going to be the marketing coin. It's going to trade under CMO. And it's something where every member of my community either was or is or wants to be or sells to the CMO. So it's like this is it. And then it can have these use cases beyond, like, HubSpot wants to do an event for CMOs. They can, instead of raffling off an Apple Watch, they can just reward people in CMO coin. Right? So anyway, all these ideas that came from it, and so it's been this very interesting way to see, like, how do we reward members? How, what does it mean to have a transactional layer in the community? What does it mean for people to have a stake in the coin for the community? And what are some of these factors that go on in having creator coin that actually have nothing to do with the community? So there are lots of things that I'm learning by doing. One thing I will also add is that one of the reasons I was excited about this community in the first place is that it is so much about experiential learning, right? And I think that the people who get the most out of a community like mine and perhaps yours is they are very much like these very hands-on learners who like to get in the weeds and know how something works from the inside out. And so this, I thought, like, yes, absolutely. If this takes off, okay, I'm the main beneficiary of it too. But this is something where even when we released these NFTs, these non-fungible tokens for the community, I priced these at the equivalent of $10. Okay? And so and you pay in CMO coins. I've had all these coin drops for the community. So basically, for most people who want to try this out in my community, they're free. Yeah. And if they're not, it's like so this, then it's designed to make it as equitable as possible and give people a chance to say, like, oh, well, I don't have to worry about some bidding war for some $10,000 NFT that I may not even get. I could just pay a few bucks of some coins that I might already own and now see how this stuff works. And then maybe I'll try to sell it for $11 or $9. Maybe I'll try to give it to someone and not care if I give this thing away or not. And so opening up these where, like I'd love for there to be a whole breed of marketers, a whole cohort of sorts who say, I got like the first coins I own, the first NFTs I own came through the serial marketers community. That might not mean they got rich off of it. I'd love to get them, have their own private jets to the Cannes Lions and that are thanks to serial marketers. But even if we don't quite get there, then still I'd say the knowledge people can gain from it is pretty powerful too.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about, and I'd be interested to know where you're at with this, but I've been thinking it's a really nice way to reward contribution as well. And like, to have a coin and be able to, I don't know, let's say, for example, you have, sponsors buying the coin, and then it gives you an opportunity to be able to redistribute coins to people who are contributing more content or adding more value to the community, right? So is there any kind of reward, like almost as a reward scheme?
So this is actually where I have a lot of trouble, and if there are people like yourself or members of your community and audience who have more thoughts on this, so one of the biggest things I'm trying to wrap my head around is where's that right line between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Okay. And one member and advisor, it came to me and it's like, we should do a membership drive for the community before the end of the year. We should and reward people with CMO coins and have this some milestone and all that. And I keep involving more people in this conversation because I think I can do more to incentivize member referrals, but I'm also really worried about the kinds of people who take part in this are just trying to do it for the potential rewards and not maybe lapse on the quality control for making sure that the right members are part of the community, and so I'm really torn on things like this. Now I've done some kind of incentivizing. I use this platform Bonfire, for instance, that plugs into Rally. And so if I'm trying to get some member feedback now, I can post, say, like a very simple question on Rally, and then offer on Bonfire, and then offer a coin or 3 for people who are so it's like and there it's almost like, okay, well, I'm basically like rewarding people for something of value that they're giving me, and it makes a little more sense. But I'm not saying that the extrinsic motivation side is wrong. I'm just
encourage the wrong behaviors in the community.
Exactly, and maybe it'll be fine. Is the potential upside way better than the risk that goes into it? And I just don't know yet. And so this is where I also am, I want to make sure that this is a community that's transacting first around ideas and relationships, and transacting around things that are like offers to tap into someone's experience, to tap into someone's jobs that they're posting, things like that, and not make it. I'd say when the most money
gets the most power in the community.
Yeah, and when I see some of the stuff on Twitter or some of these other things about like where it's all about how much money you're making, and you bought this NFT for $100 and now it's worth $500. Gotta say, congrats to you. That bores the hell out of me. And I just am very wary of going down that route.
Yeah, I mean, we because we're slightly probably different in a way, because we run ours as a social enterprise. So it's a not-for-profit. There is no membership fee, and everything we do is kind of funded by the community experts. Give up time to keep it going and add support and advice. And I think that I guess like we've had some areas like there's often a lot of requests for tools and for information, and I feel like maybe creating some of those tools as NFTs that people could purchase and own or have sort of shared ownership of, but I'm still trying to get my head around it myself, and I think that's quite interesting what you say, and I think that's certainly something that I thought would be good to reward. But as you were speaking, then I'm thinking, yeah, you're right. You could end up with people just trying to game the system rather than maybe the sense of community. And I think it's just with the whole sort of DAO, sort of having a decentralized autonomous organization. Half of me kind of thinks to myself, well, actually, in the end, could you turn all of the members ultimately have have the creator coin, whatever it is. They all actually own the community themselves in a way.
Yeah.
And sort of there's distributed ownership, and therefore within that ownership, people can hopefully shape where that organization goes around hopefully a set of values and behaviors. But have you thought about that or looked at that yet? Or
I have, and I've even looked into this Upstream, which I'm a big fan of. If you go to upstreamapp.com, I use them for a lot of my community events, virtually especially. And so they just launched DAOs. Their founder, Alex Taub, is very deep in crypto. And like I'm a member of this DAO that they've launched within their within this like NFT group within Upstream. And now, if I go this route, and it's something I actually plan on having a conversation with Alex and my community very, very soon about this, is I want to make sure again that it's more about the people who are most interested in getting involved and having a stake, but having an extremely low buy-in for doing so. And so again, it's not just like the person with the most disposable income has the most influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, because obviously, like me, you've been obviously around a little bit, and you remember the hype and the hype cycle and the .com crash. And the thing about with the NFT values is, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on right here, right now. In fact, last night there was another big launch of another big NFT site, and the valuations are going crazy, right? And so all of a sudden, the hype can create these kind of boom bust. The market always rectifies itself, so there's always an element of risk around the NFT side, especially in an early immature market that we're still kind of in this space, right? So I think I'm kind of with you on there. I think for us, I don't think it would be necessarily around financial gain from trying to, I guess, make assets worth more money than, well, as much money as they can be, but more about trying to, I guess, enhance a sense of shared ownership and collaboration and contribution, and trying to find ways to use these tools for good, not for profit necessarily, because we are not for profit ultimately in the day. But having said that, maybe it would still be quite good for some fundraising to help the community, to resource it to do other things as well. So, but that I will check out Upstream, and so that's it. That seems like quite interesting. I think in a way, probably become part of a DAO before maybe I start to change Agencynomics into one and see firsthand what happens.
And one of the things I don't know, for instance, is like you create an Agencynomics DAO, but say members don't do anything actively about it, right? Like do you have this very small share of people who then have this outside influence if you're making a DAO versus, I see it as, I see the opportunity for serial marketers, knowing the vast majority of people will not, check that box or do anything about it. Is that still having a more of like a working group, an advisory board of sorts, and like, a way to reward some ideas coming through and get people involved in a more tangible way, that where those benefits then extend to the entire community, and we become stronger for it.
So so my last question to you really is, where do you feel right now, based on the last 3 years, your community is going? I mean, is it a question of growing in size, or do you see new areas of development for it?
Well, this is also something where I think that that the size of the community matters less. Like I think much more, if I can create 10% more value for the members of the community, then that's just going to inspire just far more people to refer the right members. And I don't know what the right size is. Like yes, if I reach 100,000 members, then I probably become an easier acquisition target or like that. But I could also try to do that in what for me are all the wrong ways and reasons. I like, there's a lot more that I want to focus on in terms of some of these interest group areas, and whether it's like brand or agency side, or even some of the local markets. I think that there are some great opportunities for that. I do think integrating the CMO coin into the community is a big one. They're just some, like, I've got this terrific developer, Alistair Marcellin, and so she's constantly helping bring some of my sort of crazy ideas to life. And but there's actually a lot that I've built that I just actually been running this sort of event of sorts in November called 30 Days of Serial Marketers, where every day I was communicating some new like features and ways that you can engage with the community that I'd say the vast majority of members have no idea about. So I think that there's so much going on already that could just be communicated better. And also one thing I'd love to figure out is, what is the appetite for virtual events coming up? Like, even as in-person events come back, there are going to be some great ways to connect people who just cannot be in the same room together. And
I mean, on that note, it's quite important, because if if we take, Web3 as a kind of a holistic perspective of Web3, and we're already seeing metaverse worlds being built. I've been looking at this quite a lot. You see, record land purchases happening within the metaverse? And I've been thinking to myself, would I see, actually the community in a way, becoming virtual? Because as people get used to working on a more virtual basis, will people actually be happier to go into virtual environments to network, through avatars? It will, Second Life is having a rebirth, but it's like, would, actually, it almost makes sense in a way that is, again, it comes down to time and ease to be able to do this, I guess. But if the next generation, if Gen Zs their appetite is much more, to engage in virtual stuff, and, the stuff that Facebook do, with Oculus becomes even more portable, even more wireless. I think you might be right. I could almost see the virtual communities having, but I don't know whether I should go and create Agencynomics, in the metaverse now, and buy some land and get everyone to go there and then create an experience in there. Another food for thought.
Yeah, and there's still some, like, there's this one group I'm part of, and we run these small monthly Zoom calls, and actually even now, I mean, it's just while we've got a core group locally, like, to get everyone together in the same place is just so tough, even for those who are near each other, and yet. Just having 10 people over Zoom where you could see all of our faces at the same time, could have like the sharing these updates, getting people's just very simple sort of 2D reactions to things. It works, and so I kind of veered away from Zoom for a while for a lot of the stuff I was doing this year, and weirdly, for some of these kinds of sessions, I miss it and realize it's just more and more like that has its place too. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think sometimes we're too busy trying to run ahead and we forget what we've got, in hand, and actually we can make better use for it. And just my last question to you really is just around with CMOs who are busy, do you think that, so if this group that you've got, they're obviously, I'm guessing, quite C-level roles, or not really?
It's a mix of people.
But you do find that senior people will create the time for these things, is what I'm saying. I guess if you give them enough notice in their diaries, you can make these things work.
Yeah, and they're terrific people who've come on as guests and who are looking to interact with just with others, especially, like, I mean we had the head of marketing from Yield Street come on as a guest speaker the other day, and I mean, I loved that the depth of expertise from the community, like the self-selected members who took part had way better questions than I did, And so I was able to learn from the members' questions, let alone from
Right.
Whitney Racklin over there. She's amazing. So yeah, I think that and it's just and granted, every single time I do these events, no matter how well attended they are or aren't, I always think there's so many more people in the community alone who would benefit from this. And it's like, how do we communicate that better? Is it a timing thing? Is it just like is it event fatigue? Like why are people not coming? Because the people who are there are so engaged and typically so excited by it. And again, just trying to harness that. There are a lot of codes I haven't yet cracked.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you so much for giving up time today. I will put in the show notes all of the links to David and to Serial Marketers, and so you can learn more. And yeah, listen, thanks so much for giving up your time. And that's it, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Until next time, that is a wrap.